Hey guys, I'm ZSH Plays. Welcome at last to London Zoo 1985. This is a complete recreation of London Zoo in Planet Zoo as it stood in the 1980s and early 1990s. I built it in franchise mode originally. It took about 6 months to research and build. And since then I've moved it over to Sandbox and made a whole load of improvements and added a lot of new animals. So we're going to take a tour of the whole zoo. I really hope you enjoy it. Let's go. Alright, here we are at the entrance to the zoo. London Zoo is the oldest scientific zoo in the world, and I think the third oldest zoo in the world, full stop. It was built in 1828, and pretty soon it accumulated the largest collection of different species of any zoo in the world. This is a city zoo. It is in Regent's Park in London. So let's go in. So I finished building this zoo originally about a year ago, but I've been waiting for more animals to be released, including some really important ones for this zoo. I finally got all the animals I want, and I moved the zoo over to sandbox mode. So now we have sea lions and polar bears and loads of other new animals as well. I've been waiting to do a tour of this zoo for absolutely ages, mainly because I wanted A, to have those animals, and B, because I needed to wait for Planet Zoo to catch up with me. The frame rate on this zoo when I first finished building it was about 12 frames a second. So I had to wait for the engine to improve, and now we can get a pretty decent frame rate with a small amount of guests in here. So the first thing that we're going to take a look at is the Reptile House. This opened in 1927 and was built by an absolute pioneer of women in science called Joan Beecham Proctor, and it still holds reptiles today, though it is about to be turned into a sort of zoo museum and replaced with a brand new reptile house. But it's an absolutely beautiful building. It's not as big as this in real life. Because I built this zoo in franchise mode, I had to give a lot of the animals a lot more space than they had. So just putting a few Nile monitors in the back of this means it has to be really wide, but I'm pretty pleased with how this turned out. Over here we have the Aquarium, which is one of my favourite buildings in the zoo. This used to be one of my favourite places when I was a kid, mainly because they had black-tick reef sharks in there. And seeing a shark when you're a kid is always really exciting. We're going to come back to that, but we're going to start off in this area here, which was called the Sobell Pavilions. This is where the zoo kept all of their apes and monkeys, or the vast majority of their monkeys anyway. So back in the 80s, this one area held gorilla, chimps, orangutan, lemurs, about, I don't even know how many different species of monkey, like 12 or something ridiculous like that in this tiny little area. I didn't have room in franchise mode to put the chimps in, so I've just gone with the orangs and the gorillas in these old school cages. A lot of this zoo, like I say, is bigger than it should be really, but I got as close as I could in franchise mode. We have some lemurs over here. There's some mandrills behind them as well. And then some little implied habitats here for spider monkeys. And then over here, the zoo's big draw in the 80s, they had giant pandas. So they had a pair of giant pandas imported from China, obviously, which are here for a few years, which they kept in this habitat here with this crazy climbing frame structure at the top. I'm not sure if the pandas used that. This was originally another monkey cage, which they just put the pandas in for the few years that they had them. And the zoo went pretty crazy. There was loads of sort of panda-themed merchandise everywhere. Over here we have the gorilla. Again, they did not have this much space back in the 80s. These days, this entire area has been transformed into Gorilla Kingdom. So basically, where they used to have gorillas, chimps, orangs, pandas, and about 12 different species of monkey, now they just have gorillas and a couple of monkey species. And it's really nicely themed, and the gorillas have a huge amount of space. No more sort of peering at them in a little concrete cell through some glass. It is really nice now. Because the zoo was built sort of early 1800s, there's architecture in the zoo that's still there today that dates from the 1820s, then right the way through the beginnings of sort of more naturalistic enclosures at the turn of the 20th century. Some incredible modernist buildings, which we'll take a look at later, from the 1930s, and then this dates to the 1970s. So we've got some macaques over here. I think these were not Japanese macaques in the zoo. They were a different type of macaque, but this is as close as we can get in Planet Zoo. And then down here we have some capuchins, which are one of my favourite monkeys in the game. They were a lot of fun to watch. Again, more crazy climbing frames. That was not fun to build. Now down here we've got a birds of prey aviary, which I've finally been able to cover in mesh, because there was no mesh in the game when I built this zoo. So that looks a lot better now than it used to. So yeah, big old aviary for loads of different birds of prey down there. This is the clock tower. This is one of the oldest buildings in the zoo. It was built back in the 19th century for llamas and camels. Incidentally, you can download this zoo on the workshop. I'm going to put an updated version on today, but there is the full history of each habitat in an education board that you can read, and it tells you what's in the zoo now as well. This is just a first aid post now, obviously way too small to keep animals in. And this is the oldest structure in the zoo. This is the raven's cage. This was the first habitat that London Zoo ever had, I believe. Just a tiny little cage that they used to put ravens in. Obviously there's nothing in there these days. And that leads us into Berkeley Court. This is the main sort of food, drink, shopping area of the zoo. So there's a restaurant, gift shop, nice fountain, and there used to be back in the 80s some more enclosures here. This one was for parrots, so I've got some of Drax's little lorikeets in here now. And then over here was an enclosure for gibbons, which I would love to have something in, but there's no gibbons in Planet Zoo, so it's empty. And then over here, a flamingo lake. There are a lot of flamingos in this zoo, because when I built it, that was the only water bird in the game. We still only got 2, but I did add some of the red-crowned cranes in yesterday, so we'll see some of those later. But yeah, just a simple little flamingo pond to make this area look a bit nicer. And then behind it is an aviary for crows. We used to have every different species of corvid in the UK in those cages back there. All of this stuff has been removed now and replaced with Penguin Beach, which is a pretty amazing penguin habitat, which I'd highly recommend if you're ever in London Zoo. I think it's the biggest in the UK, or maybe the biggest in Europe. I can't remember, but it is a really, really cool habitat. There's another pond here, which was for, I think, for pelicans, I believe. So nothing in there. This leads us round to the Parrot House. This is another building that's no longer there. I think Penguin Beach has replaced this as well. This was a really nice habitat with loads and loads of different species of parrots and lorikeets and all that kind of stuff. Got a few here. It's a really nice building dating from 1869. I didn't build an interior, I couldn't find any references for it. And then that takes us up into the new Lion Terraces. This is the other sort of new, at the time that this zoo is set, habitat, which was for pretty much every species of big cat. We got some cheetahs here, and if we go down here, you're going to see some tigers. And yeah, it held lions, tigers, cheetah, jaguar, leopard, I think, caracal, serval. Name a big cat or even a medium-sized cat, and it was probably in here. Some of these were rotational habitats as well, so they had other cats that you don't see here, snow leopards, I think a puma, and depending on which day you went to the zoo, you might see one or the other. Great viewing for the animals. The habitats aren't the biggest. Here's a proper concrete monstrosity, which is something I really like. And that takes us down into a little garden area here. It definitely split opinion when it was built, this place. It's all jagged, angular pieces of concrete. Personally, I love it. Some people did not like it. Depends on your taste, I guess. Let me come round to this habitat here for the lions. Again, all of this area has been, oh, there we go. All of this area has been replaced now with land of the lions. So where you used to have pretty much every species of big and medium-sized cat in the world, now the whole area is given over to lions. So they have a huge amount of space now, really heavily themed around an Indian nature reserve, because it's Asiatic lions that they have here. And yeah, that's another really good habitat. Obviously it's got lions in it. They are pretty much the laziest animals in the entire world, so you have to be very lucky to see them sort of moving, but if you do, it is a really good habitat. And the final habitat in the new Lion Terraces is a clouded leopard habitat here. Let's see if we can see him. There he is. I love clouded leopards. I've put custom habitat signs everywhere. Obviously these are way more modern than they would have been back in the 80s, but there's just over 100 species in this Planet Zoo version. There was absolutely no way I was going to create realistic, tiny 80s habitat signs for 105 species, so I just did what I always do with those and made a really simple one based on Frontier's own design. But the lettering and the colour scheme and everything is what they used to have in the zoo back then. This is one of my favourite buildings in the zoo, the Tropical Bird House. Really beautiful. This is still there now. It still holds birds, although it's been reconfigured so it's a walk-through inside, rather than little cages everywhere. Made heavy use of Chirac's bird pack in this area. That incredible painting he created there. And some of his birds, like the hornbill up here. Yeah, really beautiful building that. Got some more aviaries around here. And then the final habitat at this end of the zoo is the wolfwood. This again is no longer there. It's a walk-through squirrel monkey habitat now, which is a lot of fun. Everyone loves squirrel monkeys. But it was quite famous. It was in a film in the UK called Withnail and I. And the final scene of that film takes place outside of this habitat looking into it. So let's move back on into the main part of the zoo now. So back past the lions, and this brings us out to my favourite building in the zoo, which you will know all about if you're a subscriber to this channel, the penguin pool. So this was built in the 1930s, one of the first ever modernist buildings in the UK, never mind in a zoo, by the Tecton group. I've made a sort of Planet Zoo version of it. It's a lot more sort of elliptical IRL, but I just absolutely love this habitat. It is so bizarre, it's so beautiful. It's not very good for penguins. They tried hard when they designed it. They've got a pool, and these ramps enable them to walk up to the top, and they can do that in the game as well. But building the whole thing out of concrete turned out not to be great for the penguins. And the pool's also a lot shallower IRL than it is here. So they moved the penguins to the new Penguin Beach that I mentioned before. But this is a Grade 1 listed building here in the UK, which means it's considered to be of enormous historical importance. So the zoo are not allowed to do anything with it. In fact, they have to maintain it. They can't let it sort of rot away. They can't make any changes to it at all. So they probably wish they could get rid of it, depending on how into architecture they are. I'm very glad they haven't. I love the fact that you can still go and see this, but it's just got a fountain in it now. There's no penguins in it. And we can see the possibly the ugliest building in the zoo, depending on how into brutalism you are. This is the Casson Pavilion, which is a part of an architectural movement that was huge in Britain in the 60s and 70s. Well, not just Britain, all over the world, I think, called brutalism. I believe this is supposed to evoke elephants themselves, these huge walls. I'd say it's split opinion, but I think opinion was pretty much that it was awful. It was the place to see the elephants though. Certainly gave you great views of them. This is another building that's still in the zoo, but no longer with elephants. I think they have Babirusa in here now, which is quite a change. So no elephants at London Zoo these days. It is just too small, though I know a lot of guests miss the fact that there are no elephants or rhinos at the zoo anymore. Now, speaking of rhinos, the other side of this building held rhinos and pygmy hippos as well. So all your big ticket African mammals in there. In the background you can see the Stork and Ostrich house, which had those animals and numerous others. It's actually loads of habitats here. I only put 4 in. I think there was about 10 in this building, which again is a lot smaller in real life. So I've got some tortoises and some anteaters on this side, and then ostriches and cassowary on the other side. That over there is the ape and monkey area where we started at. Over here we have another habitat that is not in the zoo anymore, which was one of the most iconic ones, the sea lion pool. This was the first habitat in the zoo where they tried to make a sort of naturalistic environment rather than just a cage basically. I think it dates to the early, maybe the 1920s, 1910s, something like that. You can see a big aviary in the background as well. And there was a viewing platform for the sea lion shows. And they used to jump off this rock and down into the pool below. Behind it is the worst habitat in the zoo. This was gone long before I visited. I think they got rid of this at the start of the 80s. It is hideous. The seal pond. Unbelievably, I'm pretty sure it was actually smaller than this IRL, and that land at the back there is only there because Planet Zoo won't let you build a habitat without some land in it. It was literally just a circle of water with this rock in the middle that the seals lived on. Pretty horrific. I'm amazed it was still in the zoo in the 80s, to be honest, but yeah, that went pretty quickly at the start of the 80s. You can see beyond it Regent's Park, which is where this zoo is set, and there was some more cages back here as well for, I think it had grey foxes in, which I would love to have in Planet Zoo, but we don't. So moving on, let's take a look at one of the other most iconic habitats in the zoo, the Mappin Terraces. So it's just past the aviary here, but we have flamingos and we now have the red-crowned cranes in here as well. I really like this. So moving on, this is the Mappin Terraces. This is the zoo's first attempt at a Hagenbeck style panorama. So by the start of the 80s, what they had here was pelicans down here. I've used flamingos for that. Then peccaries back there, so I've used the warthogs. And then up there we have bears and mountain goats. And we're going to take a look at those. And then there's a restaurant here. This all still exists, but these days, and you'll see why in a second, they basically don't use any of those upper areas. They just use this area here for emu and wallaby, and it's like an Australian area. But let's climb on up here. Again, this is smaller IRL than I've built it here. I had to build it much bigger for franchise mode, and I think they had 6 different species of bear just along here. So I've managed to get 4 in. So we've got some bears here, and then moving around this concrete monstrosity, we have grizzlies somewhere. There we go. These are some big lads. And then you can see polar bears over there. And then we have some black bears in here as well. I think they're in their den by the looks of it. So yeah, imagine this place but with 2 more species of bear and quite a bit smaller than this. You can see why they do not keep bears here anymore. Amazingly, the polar bears actually did well here. They bred. They had a baby polar bear, and that lived to a ripe old age, as did the parents. I think they were distributed to various other zoos. So it worked better than you might think. At the top, these mountains, and you can see one up there, They have mountain goat, various different species. I think they did have Dall sheep at one point, possibly ibex, I'm not sure, but it's a really cool panorama. I wish I could have, despite the animal welfare concerns, I wish I could have come up here and seen this. But again, I think this closed in 1983 in terms of the upper levels of it. Let's head out of the Mappin Terraces and go and see the final habitat on this part of the zoo. This path here takes us back out to the aquarium that we saw earlier. There's no inside. I couldn't be bothered to build an inside when there are no fish in the game, but I really like this, and I really like the fact that you can see the Mappin Terraces up above it. If I've not mentioned it, London Zoo is actually split into 3 parts. First by a road, where there's a tunnel underneath it, and then a canal, and there's a bridge over that. So let's head on under the road where we started this tour and get into the central part of the zoo. So that's the path that we came down up there, and we are going to take this route here and head through the tunnel under the road. So this was part of the zoo's design pretty much from the beginning, I think. These tunnels have been there for well over 150 years. They have all this really cool Lascaux style cave arts, which I've replicated really badly there. It looks very cool in real life though. Alright, so under the road and into the central part of the zoo. We start off with this beaver habitat, very small beaver habitat, no longer in use. And then we're going to go to the oldest building in the zoo that's still used for its original purpose, which is the Giraffe House. So this was built in 1836. It's been extended since, but these iconic doors, tall enough for a giraffe to walk through, are really famous. I just love this building. I think it's really beautiful. There used to be camels over here, and then okapi way over in the distance there, and zebra in with the giraffe. I think it's just the giraffe, zebra and okapi these days, and they've moved the camels out so that there's more room. This whole area was known as the Cotton Terraces. It's where the Into Africa part of the zoo sits today. It's a pretty cool area. So around here, and you can see the canal that I mentioned down there. We've got some bongos in here somewhere. I think they're hiding away down there. And then we had Arabian oryx here. I've used Gemsbok for them. They're related. Pretty small, bare bones habitats here. Just a dusty sort of rectangle for them. And this is the part that you can still do. You can go into the Giraffe House, which is great, especially if the weather's poor and the giraffes are in here. Yeah, you can get really up close and personal with them. Got a zebra there. And then down here, some Unyala. This was pretty much the first part of the zoo I built a very long time ago, so some of these paths and stuff are not up to current standard. I'll have to forgive that. If we cross over the bridge over the canal here, we come to the Snowdon Aviary, which they're currently in the middle of turning into a giant colobus walkthrough, which I think is going to be very cool. Looking forward to that opening. But this was a huge walkthrough aviary with loads of different species in it. Obviously this is Planet Zoo, so I think we've got some peafowl, and I've just added the red-crowned cranes in there. But yeah, it doesn't really capture the original, the lack of birds. And then we've got a pheasantry here, which I've put more peacocks in. I don't even know how many separate peacock and flamingo habitats I had in this zoo when I first built it, but London Zoo had a lot of aviaries back then, and we do not have a lot of birds. Then we've got some owl aviaries, which thanks to Drac now have some owls in. I don't think these are in the zoo anymore, they might be, but basically this whole area is closed off at the moment while they refurbish the aviary for the colobus, so you can't actually get over here. There's another piece of modernist architecture down here, past these aviaries, which are pretty cool. This is another Tecton design, which is the exit for the zoo, or was. And then we can cross back over the next bridge and see the final part of the zoo, which has some of my favourite buildings in it. So ahead of us is the other tunnel, and then round here we see one of my favourite buildings in the zoo, which I actually stole for my own Planet Zoo build, which is the roundhouse. I've got the insect house here. This is the one building in the zoo I couldn't find a picture of in all my research, and somebody on ZooChat kindly sent me a photo of it. Obviously it's not there anymore. It's a pretty weird building, so thank you to them. So we have the small clawed otters here. Some meerkats over there, and behind us the roundhouse. I love this building. This was one of the first modernist buildings in Britain. It was built a couple of years before the penguin pool. It was designed for gorillas, so it has an indoor and an outdoor. As you can imagine, at the time it was actually thought of as a revolutionary and amazing habitat for gorillas. You can see that is no longer the case. So the gorillas became chimps, and then orangutan, and then in the 80s koala. It's a much more suitable habitat for a little koala than it was gorillas. It's got an inside as well, so we'll take a look at that. See if we can spot any koala. There we go. He's having fun. These days, I think, or the last time I went to the zoo anyway, this is empty now. I'm not sure what their plans for it are, to be honest. And then finally, we have the Clore Pavilion. This is now the rainforest and nightlife exhibit, which is a really cool walkthrough with sloths and bats and all sorts of cool stuff in it. Back in the 80s, it was the small mammal house. So we've got bush babies, got some little fennec foxes, got some pangolins in here, and then some lemurs down here. We've got the red ruff lemurs in here, and then right at the end the ring-tailed lemurs. Playing his little keyboard. And that is it. That is London Zoo 1985. I picked a route that would take us through the entire zoo. There's just 3 places we haven't seen. The red panda, who lived in a tree near the penguin pool. The children's zoo, which was on the other side of the penguin pool. And we have loads of domesticated animals that the children could pet. And finally, the old Nocturnal house, which we have aardvarks in, which was just next to the children's zoo. So that's the tour. I really hope you enjoyed it. Thank you so much for watching. I'll be back soon with some more Planet Zoo.